So I was recently watching a commentary by David Simon that had to do with the fall of the American Empire. And while he had a lot of interesting contributions, I really think his central point was invalid, which was that people are losing value. I think that you could definitely say that uneducated and unskilled people are losing value. But the main reason why it seems this way is because we're being educated in the wrong way. We're being educated in ways that are in the short-term interests of our government leaders. They try to fulfill these passing promises to the public, and when their investment choices turn out to fail, they've created a whole sector of producers and creators that kind of become obsolete once the technology advances. They prioritize certain businesses over others and educate us to do the privileged jobs. And then when the rest of the world becomes educated and skilled, the value of those jobs goes down and you can't make nearly as much money doing those jobs. And it's fundamentally a problem of our education not training us in the long term, but training us in short-term skills. If we allowed education to develop freely without the government direction of the curriculum, and without the government prioritizing certain types of education over others, we would clearly see which type of education was in our long-term interests. I know that one of the main reasons all of the protests started in Berkeley was when they found out that they were doing nuclear destructive research on their campus, and it's because the government was directing the education towards military needs. Just because they needed to at that moment, it was expeditious. But it wasn't in anyone's long-term interest to get training in these jobs that were going to become less and less useless when peace started becoming the norm. If we just had a bit more freedom in teaching and how in the style of education, people would choose schools that were in their long-term interests, and they'd choose to train in tasks that wouldn't lose value over time. As our elected representatives are constantly changing and turning over, and as their immediate interests are constantly changing, we can't expect them to train us in jobs that will be useful for our long-term interests in the future. In times of war, the people are trained in fighting and heavy industry, manufacturing and production. And when peacetime rolls around, these people lose all of their value in society. I know that in Japanese history, the samurai class had risen to the ruling status because the most important part during the Civil War period was to be a good warrior. But once the warriors established the peace, was the moment they became obsolete. It's pretty ironic. With the concentration of military power comes the obsolescence of military power. And in a peaceful society, voluntary exchanges and trading become more important than coercive stealing. And creativity becomes more important than productivity. The shift from tangibles, from a manufacturing economy, to intangibles, to a service economy, it's actually increasing the value of humans in society, as opposed to the value of physical tools and physical capital. The transition has increased the value of skilled labor, whereas before, during manufacturing, the value of heavy machinery was supreme. If educators were allowed to experiment with different schooling styles, we would come to understand the types of education that were useful, regardless of current circumstances, and we would retain our values, these values, throughout all of our lives. We could be educated in such a way that kept us open and adaptive to future developments and changing times. After all, it was Darwin who said, "It is not the strongest of the species that survive, but the ones most responsive to change." We need learning that teaches us the principles of life that are true regardless of historical circumstances. Whereas now, education often directs us toward the skilled labor that we need today, but that will not be useful later, we don't learn the general principles of life, the principle behind things.